Picture this, a fifth-floor apartment balcony, 6 feet by 10 feet, concrete under your shoes. No yard, no fence line to plant along, just railings, sunlight, and about a dozen pots you could fit if you were smart about it. Now, picture that same balcony in July, and you're pulling a ripe fig off a tree that's shorter than you are, or picking a handful of cherries from a tree that's never touched soil that wasn't inside a container. That's not a fantasy. Dwarf and semi-dwarf fruit trees have gotten good enough, and container growing techniques have gotten precise enough that a genuine backyard orchard harvest now fits on a patio, a rooftop, or a driveway strip most people would call not enough space. Here's the number that surprises most people. A single, well-managed dwarf tree in a 15 to 25-gallon container can produce anywhere from 10 to 40 pounds of fruit a year, depending on the species and how many seasons it's been established. Multiply that by even 4 or 5 pots, and you're looking at real, meaningful food, not a garnish, not a novelty. But not every fruit tree behaves the same way in a container. Some tolerate it beautifully, some sulk. Some need a specific rootstock, or they'll either stay too small to fruit or get too big for the pot you bought. So today, we're going through 12 fruit trees that are genuinely built for pots, containers, and small spaces. Not technically possible if you fight it, but trees that actually thrive under those conditions. For each one, you'll get what makes it container-friendly, roughly how big it stays, and what it actually needs to fruit well where you live. Some of these you'll expect. A couple of them might genuinely surprise you, including one that most people assume needs a full orchard row and doesn't. Let's get into the list. Here's the myth that stops most people before they even try. The idea that fruit trees need deep, expansive root systems to produce real fruit, so a container is basically setting the tree up to fail or stay ornamental. That's not how it actually works. The size of a fruit tree isn't primarily controlled by how much room its roots have. It's controlled by root stock. Nearly every fruit tree sold commercially is 2 plants grafted together, a fruiting variety on top and a rootstock underneath that determines vigor and mature size. Nurseries have spent decades breeding dwarf and semi-dwarf rootstocks specifically to cap a tree size while keeping full fruit production. Put one of those in a container, and you're not stunting a tree that wants to be 20 feet tall. You're growing a tree that was engineered to top out around 6 to 10 feet in the first place. That's the correct method. Match a genuinely dwarfing rootstock to a large enough container, and the tree isn't fighting its environment, it's living in the one it was bred for. Now, let's get into the list. 1. Fig. Figs are probably the single most forgiving container fruit tree that exists. They tolerate root restriction well, often fruiting better slightly pot-bound than loose in open ground. A fig in a 20-gallon pot typically stays 6 to 8 feet tall and can produce 2 harvests a year in warm climates, a smaller early summer crop and a larger late summer one. 2. Meyer Lemon. This is the one people are surprised belongs on a cold climate small space list, since citrus reads as tropical. But Meyer lemons are naturally compact, thrive in containers, and critically can be wheeled indoors for winter in colder zones. A single tree in a 15 to 20-gallon pot can produce 30 to 40 lemons a year once established, which lines up with that 10 to 40 pound range we mentioned in the hook. 3. Dwarf Cherry, specifically varieties like Stella or Compact Stella. These are self-fertile, which matters enormously in a small space. You don't need a second tree for pollination. On dwarfing rootstock, they stay around 6 to 8 feet and yield roughly 10 to 15 pounds a year once mature. 4. Pomegranate. Genuinely underused in small space growing. Pomegranates naturally grow as large shrubs, they tolerate heavy pruning without sulking, and they're remarkably drought-tolerant compared to most fruiting trees, a real advantage if you're hand-watering containers on a balcony. If that Meyer Lemon number surprised you,
A full-size citrus harvest coming off something you can roll indoors for winter? That's exactly the kind of trade-off we're covering for all 12, so stick with the list because a few of the ones coming up flip the needs full sun and warm climate assumption even further.
5. Dwarf Apple. Apples on M27 or M9 dwarfing rootstock are some of the most reliable container performers on this list, typically topping out at 6 to 8 feet. The catch: most apple varieties need a second tree nearby for cross-pollination, so if you're only planting one, look specifically for self-fertile varieties or plan on 2 pots instead of 1. 6. Dwarf Peach or Nectarine. These are naturally more compact than most stone fruit, even on standard rootstock, and container culture actually helps control the aggressive growth that makes in-ground peach trees so demanding to prune. Expect 6 to 8 feet tall and, once mature, somewhere in that 15 to 25 pounds range per season. 7. Kumquat. Smaller than a Meyer Lemon in every dimension: tree size, fruit size, water needs, which makes it one of the easiest citrus options for a genuinely tight space like a small balcony or windowsill adjacent patio. It's also more cold tolerant than most citrus, surviving light frost that would damage a lemon tree. 8. Dwarf Plum. Like the cherry, look specifically for self-fertile varieties. Santa Rosa is a common one. Plums on dwarfing rootstock stay around 8 feet and tend to be less fussy about soil pH than apples or cherries, which matters more than people expect in a container, where you can't rely on native soil to buffer mistakes. Now, a mechanism worth understanding here, because it explains why all 8 of these work. Container roots are physically restricted, which means the tree can't outgrow its container the way it could outgrow a hedgerow. Growers have long observed that this restriction actually triggers earlier and more consistent fruiting in many species. The tree reads limited root space as a cue to prioritize reproduction over vegetative growth. That's a working theory rather than a fully settled mechanism across every species, but it lines up with what container growers report across fig, citrus, and stone fruit alike. One thing that trips people up at this stage: container size has to scale with the tree, not stay fixed. Start a bare root dwarf in a 5-gallon pot, and you'll be repotting into 15, then 20, then 25 gallons over the first 3 to 4 years as the root system fills in. Skip that step, and even the most container-friendly rootstock will stall out. If you've made it this far and you're already mentally picking which 4 or 5 of these fit your space, drop a comment with your climate zone. I'll actually read through and tell you which ones on this list are realistic where you are. 9. Dwarf Apricot. Self-fertile in most varieties, which makes it a low-commitment option if you only have room for 1 pot. It stays around 8 to 10 feet on dwarfing rootstock and tends to fruit slightly earlier in the season than peach or plum, giving you a longer stretch of container harvests if you're growing several of these side by side. 10. Olive. This is the surprise entry we mentioned back in part 1. Most people assume olives need a full grove, not a pot. But olives are naturally slow-growing and tolerate root restriction extremely well, often staying a manageable 6 to 10 feet in a large container for decades. They're also strikingly drought-tolerant, needing far less water than any other tree on this list. 11. Dwarf Pear. On quince rootstock, pears stay compact and productive, though like apples, most varieties need a second pollinator tree nearby. If space only allows 1 pot, look for a self-fertile variety specifically bred for that limitation. 12. Everbearing Mulberry, specifically dwarf varieties like Issai. Mulberries aren't commonly thought of as container trees, but dwarf cultivars stay under 8 feet and can fruit multiple times through the growing season rather than one concentrated harvest window, useful if you want fruit spread across more of the year instead of all at once. So that closes the list, all 12. Here's the through line connecting every one of them.
Dwarfing rootstock does the real work of keeping these trees container-sized, and root restriction, rather than working against fruit production, often supports it. For care that applies across the board, repot every 2 to 3 years into a slightly larger container until you hit that 20 to 25 gallon range, then maintain rather than upsize further. Use a well-draining potting mix, not garden soil, which compacts and suffocates roots in a container. And feed with a balanced fertilizer through the growing season, since container trees can't reach outward for nutrients the way in-ground trees can. One last thing worth remembering: you don't need all 12. Even 3 or 4 of these, chosen for your climate and your actual sun exposure, can produce a genuinely meaningful harvest by year 3 or 4. If this changed how you think about what's possible on a balcony or a small patio, subscribe. This channel is going deeper into small space growing all year, and you'll want to be here for it. Small space, real fruit. That's the whole idea.